So,
And
dude,
welcome to technical difficulties with the Badgers. Now that everything in the world has gone wrong with the stream again, um, I am here with the after show, and we have this lovely
and
news
the stream
article.
is good, by the way.
Oh, good, and the stream is good, and we have this lovely news article, uh, which after the great news stories we had, I'm gonna bring you all down again. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
great.
The UN hates us. It's because the UN doesn't understand
Oh, yeah.
autonomy.
That was a horrible, horrible thing.
I'll post the link in the Poland Pussy After Show for those of us in here.
Yeah.
To
The
follow
link is
along
in
at
the low
home.
bar of the actual stream for anybody that wants to follow at home and read along with me. United Nations urges U.S. to give up free expression to combat racism. I'm going to read that again. United Nations urges U.S. to give up free expression to combat racism. So first of all, I'm just going to
No.
point out the First Amendment does not contain the word expression. Just the social justice community added the word expression to the discussion back in the 90s when they wanted to argue that spilling paint on a canvas and putting it up on the wall is political speech. The First Amendment exists specifically to protect political speech from being silenced by our government, and to protect journalists from being silenced by our government, and to
prevent the government from fucking us all up.
Yeah, to protect the right of assembly against punishment by the government. So I mean, here we are. They got the word expression in the headline. Committee says America must not allow constitutional rights to be misused to promote hate speech. Constitutional rights misused. By Margaret Minge. That's probably not how her name is pronounced. It's probably something nicer than that, Mingy or something, but it looks like Minge to me. The UN issued an early warning Wednesday for the United States, urging that the government take immediate action to confront white supremacy following the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia.
What about black supremacy?
Yeah, they don't care about that.
They don't believe in it.
No, they don't believe in it. The warning and call for the U.S. government to act contained a little-noticed last paragraph, urging the U.S. to make sure that the, quote, rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, end quote, are not exercised to deny rights or freedom to others, and pressing the U.S. government to, quote, ensure that such rights are not misused to promote racist hate speech and racist crimes, end quote. So
What do they call Antifa?
Yeah. In other words, what they're basically saying is some people, just some people, not all people, some people have a right to not have to face any criticism, whether it's legitimate or not, or any slander, any defamation, anything they don't like to hear about themselves. Some people have a right to be exempt from other people's freedom of expression. And he's like, they're not
the U.S.
Yeah, they're not saying, make sure that in the course of exercising their freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, they remain peaceful. Because they could have addressed it that way. They could have said, hey, make sure that your population isn't running over people with cars for expressing themselves in public in a different way than the people that showed up to have their peaceful assembly were expressing themselves. Nope, they couldn't do that. They had to say that they wanted to make sure the rights of expression, association, and peaceful assembly are not exercised to deny the rights and freedom of others. You can't exercise your speech to deny actual rights. You could exercise your speech to deny people's wants. Some people don't want to hear things they don't like about themselves. but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're denying them a right. And here we have Antifa. I'm not going to play the... I believe that's a video.
Please don't.
I'll make sure autoplay is off. What the hell? Oh, God, that's right. I'm in a... It won't play. I won't have to worry about autoplay. It's in a... that is why I picked
Archive.
the archive and not the original. So that...
Yay!
See, I forgot that I took measures to keep something from going wrong. But as many legal scholars have noted, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. That is, the government cannot limit a person's speech because it is considered hateful towards any purpose or person or group. The Supreme Court issued a ruling on this as recently as June. The idea that the government can restrict speech expressing ideas that offend strikes at the heart of the First Amendment, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito wrote in Mattal versus Tam on behalf of 4 justices. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disparity, or any other similar ground is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate. That's when I don't know if the rest of the world is going to understand that as well. I think aren't we pretty much we unique in having that protection in the United States?
Yes. Most other European countries, I don't think any other European countries have that protection.
Canada doesn't even have it.
No, Canada.
We are the only country to guarantee free speech.
You know something interesting about the Bill of Rights? James Madison stated that these are not traditional laws. They are principles our country is founded on.
Yeah, they were. This was them recognizing that there are certain boundaries the individual has that the government should not infringe. And one of those boundaries is the ability to express your political opinion and to express your opinion of your living environment. This is very much like the Google thing, only at large. Because the Google thing, what made it wrong for Google to fire...
DeMar.
Yeah, DeMar. What made it wrong to fire him was not that it's okay for him to express those ideas because it's political speech. Because Google is a private entity, although they're working their way towards becoming their own little government. Google, as an employer, has a responsibility to recognize the employee's right to discuss the work environment and working conditions. And,
which he was doing.
Yeah, which he was doing. And
the entire memo was based on a reply that someone inquired to him.
Yeah. So this was not something that he wasn't in violation of something that an employer is allowed to ban. They cannot ban an employee from discussing working conditions. That is against that's against the law. So here we have a situation that the United Nations is saying Americans must be banned from discussing their living conditions if some Americans are going to be offended by what they say. That is the basic underlying thing that they have said here. By not saying, make sure that this political expression remains peaceful and nonviolent. If they just made an admonition, the government needs to do something to keep this expression of political unrest nonviolent, that might have been acceptable. But to say that speech shouldn't be expressed in a way that they consider to infringe on other people's rights isn't.
Is it me, or does the U.S. go back to the feudal system of the Middle Ages?
It seems like they do.
Where you have a small minority ruling over everyone else.
Well, yeah, they're wanting to be a world government.
It really
It's
is starting to become that we're ruled by the minority, no longer by the majority, with respect to the minority.
Yeah.
It's a lot like the European
Carrot's
Council, right?
here.
Yes, I'm here and I'm unmuted. Thank you, Andrew, for unmuting me.
problem.
Sorry, I was longer than I thought. We almost died of old age in the fucking lineup at the McDonald's because I guess at 8 o'clock at night, it's all the stoners are coming on shift. So
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
totally smoked a spliff before work, and I'll probably smoke another one halfway through. So
Yeah, I actually, when I was a supervisor at the gas station that I worked at, I had that problem as well. When I worked, I used to work a shift that spanned part of second and part of third shift. At times, and the other person that would come in, like usually they'd come in for third shift this way, and I'd get somebody that would come in for third shift, and they would just reek of it. And I'm like, there is nothing that you can put on that covers that up. I don't care if you spray yourself with the stuff that hunters use to hide from deer. You still smell when you smoke. And you do not smell like tobacco. Even if you smoke a regular cigarette after the other one, I will still be able to smell pot on you because I don't smoke it. So.
Oh yeah, no, and it's on top of that, right? Like if it's cold out.
Oh God, yeah.
Like this is one of the things, because like when it's warm out, if it's the middle of summer and you go out and smoke a joint and you just kind of stand there for a few minutes afterwards, and then you come in, sometimes the smell isn't really, really atrocious. But if it is fucking cold out and you come in after smoking a joint, that's literally, I can smell you from across the room.
Yeah,
it clings in the cold. I'm looking after a fucking table, and the door to the restaurant is like, I don't know, 25 feet away, 30 feet away. And they walk in, and I'm like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Now, when I would get customers that would come in at night smelling like it, I was like, cha-ching! Because we sold snacks. They show them everything in the store. We got these potato chips over here, and we just got in this new kind of potato chips, this new flavor that we didn't have before. And oh, hey, there's all the Hostess stuff is over here, and we got Little Debbie too, and Mountain Dew, and I'll sell you everything in the store, man.
But anyway, we should probably get back to the story.
Yeah. We will definitely get back to the article. But yes, the stoners are quite profitable when they come in to buy snacks. Not so much when they're your employee, and they get high before they come into work. So back to the article, and we just read the paragraph with Alito's statement. The even hate speech is protected under free speech laws.
Okay.
And under the Free Speech Amendment. In the same case, Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote a separate decision for the other half of the court, agreeing on the issue of hate speech. A law found to discriminate based on viewpoint is an egregious form of content discrimination, which is presumably unconstitutional, he wrote. A law that can be directed against speech found offensive to some portion of the public can be turned against minority and dissenting views to the detriment of all. The First Amendment does not entrust that power to the government's benevolence. Instead, our reliance must be on the substantial safeguards of free and open discussion in a democratic society. Which means he's basically saying the same thing I say, which is bad ideas shouldn't be sequestered into safe spaces where they can feed, on their own echoes and become more and more toxic over time. They should be exposed to the light of day so that we can argue with them.
He's also saying as well that when there are, and Marie Hennen, Gian Gomeshi's lawyer, said this in her interview with the National about that case, was, yes, there have been times when due process protections have been less than what they are now or ignored. And those types of things don't tend to do much good in minority communities.
Yeah,
right?
no.
Essentially, it's usually marginalized people, minorities, who end up bearing the brunt of those erosions of due process. Shut the fuck up, Kevin. What the hell is wrong with you?
That's going to become the refrain of the
At least
the
Kevin
diehard
isn't eating a
Badger
lighter
fan.
tonight, right?
Shut the
Reminds
fuck
me
up,
of Home
Kevin!
Alone.
She thinks that I'm talking to her or something, right?
Yeah,
And it's just
yeah.
like, shut the fuck up. She's like, there's no one else here. So,
Yeah, you're talking to that little
like-
box. But yeah, there's a law that can be directed. A law directed
get
one
out of
direction can
there.
be turned back on the people that asked for it. And that's the like there was a hashtag for millennial advice or something like that. I think earlier today or yesterday, and I said something to that effect on Twitter too, and in that hashtag, the fact that whatever you ask, whatever infringement you ask your Congress to make against people whose political opinions you oppose can be turned back on you and turned against you
Real
when
quick.
those people are in power and you're in the minority. So you always want to think twice before, is this a power that is too great for a bad government to have? We don't care
Yeah.
what a good government will do with it. If a bad government's abuse of it would put the people in serious peril of losing their freedoms or worse. So, and that's this situation. But as the article says, the United Nations does not quite agree because the United Nations wants
No
control.
shit.
The
The
UN,
United Nations wants to control the world.
yes. I think we should leave. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination issued its early warning and call to action for the U.S. from its meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, referring to the, quote, horrific, end quote, events. Well, those were horrific events. That doesn't need to be in quotes. The horrific events in Charlottesville on August 11 and 12, and specifically citing the killing of Heather Heyer and the alleged beating of... I didn't hear... of Deandra Harris by white supremacists. Oh, I know who that was. Deandra Harris was with a crowd of anarchists that attacked a group of people, and when they fought back, he raised a bunch of money, claiming to be a victim of a white supremacist beating. He lied.
All the horrific things came from Antifa to begin with.
Yes.
Yeah, just a tad.
We are alarmed. They're alarmed. They're the concern trolls of the United Nations are very terribly, horribly, awfully concerned by the racist demonstrations with overtly racist slogans, chants, and salutes by white nationalists. Which ones were they watching? Because I didn't see any of those. Neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. They are only concerned about the Ku Klux Klan now. They were not concerned about the Ku Klux Klan when the United Nations initially formed. They never said a word about them then.
Well, that was because back in the 1800s they were trying to restart the Civil War, so nobody cared about that.
Promoting.
well, okay. The United Nations didn't exist back then, but it was the League of Nations.
But the Ku
But,
Klux Klan was much more active when the United Nations was created. than
I
they
know,
are
I
now.
know. That's the whole thing, right? That's the entire fucking thing. Is that when your group is censured by government, right? Based on the fact that you're socially unpopular, you're not really anything to worry about anymore. Fucking Justicar did a video just yesterday or something about the press coming out finally, and this is the thing, right? Everybody was saying, Trump refused to, condemn the KKK and neo-Nazis and stuff like that, right?
Are you kidding?
He did,
He's been
okay?
condemning the KKK for 20 years.
I think he
Anyhow.
was openly condemning them during his campaign.
He was openly
he was.
condemning
But-
them when he wasn't
okay,
even running
but-
for office yet.
Oh my God. His initial statement about Charlottesville referred to horrible, hateful violence on many sides. Many sides. He repeated that on many sides, right? So he called out both. They took that to mean he wasn't calling out the white nationalists. He was only calling out the left, right? So then he specifically, a couple days later, specifically called out the white nationalists, KKK, neo-Nazis, skinheads, blah, 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 right? Okay. But then they pushed it. They pushed him to say, well, why didn't you say this? And he's because there were a lot of bad people on all sides there, right? You know, there were a lot of people engaging in violence on both sides, right?
Then he called out the alt-left.
I have named the alt-right, but what about the alt-left? I have condemned the alt-right. What about the alt-left? Okay, and everybody was like, oh my God, he's refusing to condemn the alt-right because he said the alt-left also has engaged in violence.
Yeah.
Right? And then he continued to push for the, for attention to be placed on the alt-left. And wouldn't you fucking know it, right? The alt-left, who's had free reign to fucking burn shit and beat people and fucking throw piss and smoke bombs and pepper spray people and all, like, just normal, regular people. What did they do in Berkeley just a couple of days ago? Oh my goodness. They fucking went on a rampage at a tiny little gathering organized by a fucking trans woman. Okay.
Wasn't that the one they dragged elderly woman to? Or assaulted a person?
Yeah, and they assaulted a father and his teenage son who were just walking by. Because they were like, you're Nazis. And they're like, I don't even fucking know what the fuck's going on here. We're just walking to the store.
Yeah.
Right? And
Excuse me.
And they they just fucking, and they just went crazy. And what do you see? What do you finally see? Oh, angels coming down and singing as fucking CNN and fucking MSNBC all start to acknowledge that the alt-left is violent.
They're finally getting out of hand now that they're attacking innocent bystanders that are just walking to the store.
They were always doing that.
Now that we have to acknowledge that they're doing this because it's so widely publicized that we can't ignore it.
But here's the thing, right? Because Noel Plum, and generally I like Noel Plum, he said it was the stupidest move on the part of Trump to pick this incident, Charlottesville, to draw attention to the alt-left. Well, this is not the first time Trump has drawn attention to the alt-left. He had some serious things to say after the initial Berkeley thing for the Milo talk and all of that, right? Okay, this is not the first time he's pointed to it. It is the first time he has named it as a left thing that needs to be talked about, right? And what do we see? He took a lot of fucking heat for it, but what do we see now? We see the fucking press, all this same press that's done nothing but apologize and excuse and sweep under the rug and, oh, they're peaceful, blah, 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 right? Or they're justified, because it's really self-defensive, considering the kind of horrible people that they're opposing, right?
Writing articles like it's okay to punch Nazis.
Yeah. Now the press is finally having to say, because Donald Trump, the President of the United States, said it in a press conference that Antifa and BAM and fucking Black Lives Matter are violent, right? They engage in political violence, which is technically terrorism, right? He said it, the press went fucking crazy and publicized it everywhere, and then maybe, just maybe, people were like, maybe I should look into that. Maybe these people are violent.
Yeah.
More importantly, he talked about the alt-left after he was badgered for a full day, after saying just many sides. He kept being badgered by the press to say, you don't condemn it. So he definitely ended up saying, the alt-left is bad.
Yeah, he didn't give in. He stuck to his guns, which is good because, like Karen said, having the president not cave on this makes a big difference in other people's ability to be heard talking about it.
and to
people
see
like us
what's
have been
going
talking
on,
about it
right?
for quite some time, and our listeners are familiar with it. But if you talk to your neighbor down the street that isn't involved in political stuff, and maybe doesn't even vote, this is the sad thing, but there's a lot of Americans that never vote in any election or anything, and they might not even be able to tell you who all the candidates on their ballot are, and
Just
even if
listening.
they're registered for a political party and stuff, they'll still be upset about who becomes president, though. But
Yeah, but
they
Well,
won't
actually,
vote.
you talking about being registered political party. So, like last year, I was a card-carrying member of the NDP.
Yeah.
Now, the last time I called around, like, well, would you come to this, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, I'm no longer a supporter of the NDP. If you call me one more time, I will get a lawyer and charge you with harassment. This is the,
Oh,
this
there
is
you
the
go.
fourth time I told
Yeah.
you that to take me off your calling list.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but what I think Trump did, right? Because all of these fucking things, right? They were kind of swept under the rug, and they were minimized, and they were by the press, right? So you have this entire fucking segment of the American population who watches TV, right? They watch TV, and they watch the big channels. They watch CNN, they watch MSNBC, they watch fucking
Fox, if
ABC.
they-
Some
people watch
of them
Fox.
who watch the other ones, but and they would have heard about Antifa and BAM and stuff on Fox.
Yeah.
Right? But
Actually,
there are
a lot of people
who-
think they're getting both sides if they just watch Fox and MSNBC or CBS or one of the other ones like that.
But so they would have heard of it, but there are a lot of Americans who won't touch Fox because
Yeah.
they're the right-wing nutters, right? And so they watch their 3 or 4 news channels, right? That are all essentially saying, oh, this has nothing to do with any leftist movement. It has nothing to do with left-wing politics. It's, none of it's really, it's just a few agitators, who are just in there. They're not even politically motivated. They're just there to smash windows and break things. And they show
Yeah.
up at uninvited and blah, 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 right? They are not a political group with political ends in mind, right? They are just people there to smash windows and do violence, right? And so they've been looking at, and then they see the president say, the alt left, dangerous, violent thugs. Okay. And then they're like,
who
wait a
are
minute.
these people?
Wait a minute. Like, what's going on now? And because up until then, nobody had ever actually, maybe who watched only those news channels, associated the Berkeley riot, and even if they'd heard of it, with leftist movements, with communist movements, right?
Yeah.
So it brought all of that out into the open, and it made it so that these news organizations, who had been, my dog's doing parkour, sorry about the noise,
We can hear.
but they'd never necessarily associated any of it with anything political, right? And all of a sudden now they're like, oh wait, this might actually be a thing, and this thing that nobody was telling me about, and now the news organizations can't ignore it anymore, and they can't just not report on it anymore. And so he essentially forced their hand, and he took a lot of fucking heat for it. You will not take my pack of cigarettes. I will fucking kill you. These are $20 a pack.
If the cigarettes
$20
don't,
a pack.
holy shit, that's expensive.
They're not 20. They're $13 a pack. $14 a pack.
Yeah.
But
with regards to the Trump thing, that's part of the reason that they were so upset is what the UN is doing here is they are trying to use blaming all of the violence at Charlottesville strictly
on the right.
On the right, they're trying to use that as a wedge, as leverage, right? To
of course,
pry people's attachment away from their free speech rights. This is a statement that is supposed to shame America into accepting UN, not necessarily rule, but UN authority over the United States, where the UN was really not supposed to be an authority over other countries. It's supposed to be a union between
Supposed to be a
countries.
mediator.
Yeah, a mediator between the countries.
It was supposed to
And-
keep wars from happening all the
Right,
time.
supposed to, and what does it do? It warmongers all the time instead. But in any case, this is they were going to use this to usher in a degree of power in the oligarchy in government that they cannot have as long as free speech remains in the United States. The power to act with impunity in terms of public response to that action, and in terms particularly of public criticism of that action. If you don't have free speech, if you don't have the ability to speak your mind when your government does something, to complain when the government does something that you don't like, the government can do anything and you cannot organize to stop them. You cannot spread the word that it is a bad idea. You cannot get people to vote against the politicians that are making those decisions. You can't do any of those things. That all starts with free speech. So the idea of having things that are off limits, you can't say that in public because it'll offend people. That's very attractive to oligarchs because it gives them a way to say, you can't say things in public that we don't like because that's treason, even though it actually could be patriotism. We don't want you to do this, government, because it's bad for the country. That is patriotism.
They won't even know. They won't even need to say it's treason. All they need to say is it offended some group. And here's a spokesperson for that group to say how offended they were.
Yeah. And here's what they're saying here. We are alarmed by the racist demonstrations with overtly racist slogans, chants, salutes by white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and the Ku Klux Klan. Like I said, there weren't, but anyway, promoting white supremacy and inciting racial discrimination and hatred. There were a small number of white supremacists with nothing but tiki torches.
Well, they were being peaceful.
Yeah.
It was Antifa that started the violence.
Well, okay, and this is why I always, whenever I'm discussing this particular incident, I bring up what Chris Cantwell told me, which is half of the alt-right and Unite the Right protesters were armed.
Yeah.
And actually,
nobody shot anybody.
Nobody shot
comment
anybody.
on that. I've got confirmed by multiple different people doing vlogs. Yes, they were heavily armed, and yes, they were herded towards Antifa and Black Lives Matter. The police wanted something to happen.
Yeah, but they did. There was not a single shot fired. One fucking lunatic who was apparently schizophrenic, right, got in his car and drove it into the crowd, right? Nobody else fired a single shot. There was no other deadly violence there.
Yeah, no, and that guy is actually, lunatic is a correct term there, because he has a diagnosed mental illness. So he's not somebody who like, if you just gave a bunch of rhetoric to an average person, your next door neighbor, somebody down the street that never has done anything, rotten or nuts or violent or anything, and you fed them the rhetoric from these white national groups, they'd be like, okay, well, that's probably stupid. Or even if they agreed with it, they might try to persuade other people to agree with it too, but they wouldn't go driving their car into a crowd of people and kill random people because they heard that stuff. And this guy did, and the guy that organized the rally, he actually used to be, he's a joiner. He used to be involved with, he used to be involved with the Occupy movement and stuff before he became involved with the alt-right. And his involvement switched because of that.
Are we talking about
the Charlottesville demonstration?
Jesse Kenny or something like
that?
Yeah, he uncovered some stuff about that he'd written some fucking articles for CNN back in 2009 or some shit.
So I mean,
or 2010.
To turn around and say, well, this is all from being right wing and everything. Yeah. The fatherless statement. That one, that was actually the car guy, and his father died when he was young or before he was born. I can't remember which it was in the news story. So he was raised in a single mom household. So there is also that. It is possible that he learned to deal with or didn't learn to deal with problems, but he learned to respond to problems with violence and panic and things like that, rather than to respond to problems with an analytical mind.
Well, I will say too that Chris Cantwell is just because I went and did a podcast, like I went on his podcast like in 2015. It's behind a paywall, so I was never able to even go back and re-listen to it. But he always struck me as one of these guys who is super attracted to radical movements. He picks them up, he squeezes all the juice out of them, right, and then
moves on to the next one.
He loses the energy, or the inconsistencies become apparent, and then he moves on to the next one. And so, I mean, he was involved in the men's rights movement for a while, then he moved on, and he will move on from this. Yeah. Maybe to something nuttier, or maybe to something less nutty. Who the fuck knows? But
I would
pretty sure it'll be radical.
It could be.
He'll be like
could end up with ISIS. You never know.
He'll be a Bitcoin fanatic or something like that. Who the fuck knows, right?
But no,
well,
the man who killed who killed Heather Heyer with his car. In addition to the fact that he grew up without a father, the other thing that struck me from the articles that I read about him was that he was an unruly teen. And his mother actually had to have the cops come to the house and get him under control at least once during a moment when he hit her for basically telling him what he could and could not do. So basically for being a mom, which means she didn't have the child's respect. She didn't have discipline in her home adequate enough to teach the child who was boss. And so he obviously, there were some problems there. That kind of thing can lead to basically can lead to a kid growing up to have issues with the boundary between what he wants and what other people are required to accommodate. And
exactly. Boundaries, when kids don't learn boundaries, what they're really not learning is they are not learning that other people are people too,
and that they have the same rights. Whatever rights he has, they have too. That kind of thing. So it would
like
make sense
Antifa.
that like Antifa, and it would make sense that if there was going to be somebody that would take an extreme viewpoint to the level where they would think it was all right to kill someone for having the opposing viewpoint, it would be somebody
I just remember that
raised
teacher
in
that
type of
clocked
situation.
The guy, like the teacher that clocked that guy with a bike lock.
Lock.
He could have cracked the skull open easily.
Oh yeah.
Oh fuck.
So yeah, and it's it's not to say that a person could never fall into that kind of toxic mindset from another position, or that everybody that's raised in a single mom household is going to grow up to be violent. But it does put them at a greater risk. In fact, you're 50% more likely to get involved in criminal activity, to have trouble with the police as a kid if you are raised without a father in the home. And you can't really blame the mother for the father dying when the kid was young. But that is a situation that may very well have contributed to what he did.
Well, what you have to deal with too is that yes, at this point, in the political landscape, right, these views are so extreme that it would literally take a lunatic to decide that he's going to kill people over these views, right? But once the views become normalized, in the culture, right? So we're very much in more danger of a white male genocide than we are of a race war on the part of whites to genocide the blacks and the brown people, right? There
Hell,
is
if you go on
I
Twitter,
we-
there's a bunch of
we
people
are further
calling for it.
along. We are further along in terms of the cultural conditioning that it takes to generate the kind of mass insanity that precedes genocides.
Yeah,
Right.
well, we're
When
at
it
a
comes-
point where
when it comes to
people have
targeting white
ceased.
males.
We're at a point where people have ceased to understand the difference between saying whites are superior to other people and deserve rights that other people do not have, and saying whites are not inferior to other people, and there are no
Yeah.
rights that other people have that should not also be extended to whites.
Yeah.
And they
So
do not
it's-
differentiate between those two sentiments.
No, and we are so far along this kind of, and I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but there was a video on YouTube, I think it's still up, called something like 22 Ways or something that feminism and Nazism, or that feminism, 22 things that feminism has in common with Nazism.
That's a lot.
Right? And
I've heard of it.
That's a lot.
yeah, something like that. I forget exactly how many, and it lists them off. And some of them are, the privileged group. They have arranged matters so that the privileged group can level anonymous accusations of crime against the target group.
So, Title 9.
Title IX, rape shield laws, all of those things.
Yeah, the
right?
fact that due
I mean,
process for one group is reduced for another group, that's huge. I don't think people realize how huge that is. Well, I mean, men
Yeah.
probably do, especially men that have been, but a lot of women out there, and probably a lot of
A
guys
lot of
who've
men
never
think it's
encountered
good.
it. No.
A lot of men think it's good. A lot of men think it's justified. A lot of men have such a rosy view of women that they think that it's impossible for an
yeah.
innocent man to find himself on the business end of a rape accusation.
Until they happen to be the guy that's facing one.
Or their son.
Yeah,
Or their brother.
son, yeah.
Well, think about that
Somebody-
feminist that was all for it till her son had a false accusation.
Yeah, Judith Grossman, right? And it's like, well, what the fuck did you think was going to happen, bitch?
Yeah.
Seriously, do
Well,
you
smart, so I don't
honestly
about
think?
that.
And this whole idea of even if there are some valid studies that could actually prove that in this given population at this particular time that we did this study, right? Only 2%, right, of rape accusations in this given sample, right, were false. Okay. Does anybody think for 2 seconds that in 1691 there were the same number of false accusations of witchcraft in Salem than there were in 1692? Do you think that that the false accusation rate remains static? That it never goes above, or below a given percent? It just always remains a constant compared to the number of reports. Like, we're literally in Canada. We're trying to instantiate a definition of consent, okay, that makes every single human being who has ever had sex on a regular basis for any length of time in Canada, okay, guilty of sexual assault against their partner. We have criminalized the act of kissing your partner awake. We have criminalized the act of caressing them in their sleep. We have criminalized the act of spooning them in their sleep.
Which
Snuggling
is nuts
up.
because you go to sleep snuggling a lot.
I
If you
know,
go to sleep
and then
snuggling and then you
sometimes-
don't stop snuggling after you go to sleep, you're a rapist.
I know, but the moment that the woman, and they say in this fucking judgment, right, the woman,
woman.
they don't say the victim, they say the woman, right? The moment the woman falls asleep, her consent to any sexual activity is completely vitiated until she wakes up and reconfirms it. So even if she asks you, kiss me awake in the morning before you go to bed, right? If you do that, you're committing a sexual assault. Okay, so now we're going to have surveys where the sexual assault rate is 100%. Now, what does that do to the report rate, right? Because the whole reason to make all these changes to the law is to make it so that women feel like they can report their sexual assaults, right? You know, we got to do something about this low report rate. Well, when everything is sexual assault and nobody's reporting it because they don't feel victimized.
Because reasons.
Because they wanted their partner to kiss them awake.
Because they
in
weren't
the
victimized.
You know, and I'm like, okay, so we're going to have all these surveys saying everyone in Canada has been a victim of sexual assault.
5 out of 4 women.
And oh my God, only like 3% are reporting it now instead of, 60% or whatever. No, 30%. Instead of 35% reporting it, only 3% are reporting it now. Oh my God, we need to take more measures and make it easier and easier to convict so that these women will report their horrible victimization, right? And it's just like, it's lunacy. Like the entire, we got Bill C-51 coming down the pike. It's past its second fucking parliament.
That's the one that basically says you can't you can't have exculpatory evidence that is in the form of communications because it's part of the woman's sexual history.
It's because of the Gian Ghomeshi case.
Yeah, it's the anti-Gian Ghomeshi
basically,
acquittal
if you have
act.
Evidence saying that they're lying, you can't submit it.
Yeah.
No. What it does, okay, it does a few things. Okay. It clarifies that an unconscious person is incapable of consenting, reflecting the Supreme Court of Canada's decision in RVJA. And I've talked about RVJA before. This was a situation that was a false allegation made during a custody dispute. It came out in the appeal that, yes, she lied to police about what had happened. She had agreed to they're BDSM enthusiasts. He choked her out. She went to police 2 months later when they had a big epic end of the relationship fight, right? And went and reported it and said that, oh, well, there was this night, a couple months ago where he choked me out. And, I said he could tie me up and I said he could choke me out, but I woke up with a dildo up my bum I didn't bargain for. So he went outside the scope of what I had agreed to, right? Okay, so he was convicted. He was sentenced to 2 years. He went to prison. He appealed it. During the appeal, it was revealed by her. She admitted that the only reason she'd levied the claim to the police that he had raped her, that he had gone outside the scope of her consent, was because when they were having that end of the relationship fight, he threatened to get to seek custody of their son. Okay, and she didn't want that to happen, so she went and she lied to police about it, about the whole fucking thing. Yes, she did consent to the dildo up her bum while she was choked unconscious. Yes, she agreed to all of it. That's why once she woke up and he took the dildo out of her bum, they continued to have sex for the rest of the night. And she didn't have any problems until he threatened to get custody of their son. So,
yeah.
Okay, so we have a false allegation. The appeal court judges ask the question, okay, but is it possible to give advanced consent to things that'll happen to you, sexual things that'll happen to you while you're unconscious? And the Supreme Court ruled that no, the moment you fall unconscious, your consent is vitiated. So that decision would be instantiated in law, not the decision that anybody would normally come to when it comes to an unconscious, or would think of when they hear an unconscious person is incapable of consenting, right? Which is somebody's passed out at a party and, I stick my dick in their mouth. They didn't consent to that. They're not capable of consenting to that. That's sexual assault. No, this would be even including cases where it was agreed in advance, even including cases where both parties are perfectly happy with what happened, right? All of those things, all gone, right?
I see this law putting out a lot of dominatrix out of business.
Yeah, so basically, women uniquely cannot consent to to things that they want if the state does not approve of them wanting those things.
That's right.
So I guess
and so
dominatrix porn is going to get banned in Canada.
Probably.
I don't fucking know. Anyway, so that's the First Amendment. The Second Amendment is to clarify that the defense of mistaken belief in consent is not available if the mistake is based on a mistake of law. Now, this is based actually on a good case, okay? Like they say, to make it conform to the decision in RVU and Chuck, which was actually a good decision, right? I've spent all day fucking reading that decision, and despite the fact that there was a feminist justice who decided to add all of her feminist bullshit and tack it all on, because she just couldn't resist adding to the decision of the judge, of the justice who wrote the decision, right? Oh, I feel like I need to add a few things here, right? And I'm going to take it upon myself to do so, right? And she added a whole bunch of feminist bullshit. But the decision itself and the reasoning for the decision was absolutely 100% legally sound. I'm totally fine with it. However, the wording of the amendment is ambiguous, right? And it would not just apply to, okay, so in this particular case, a guy was interviewing a 17-year-old young single mother for a job. She suggested, let's go do the interview. They met in the parking lot of a mall. She says, let's go into the mall and do the interview. He says, no, let's do it here in my van. He had a trailer attached to it. And she's like, okay. And she kept the van door open and they did the interview. And then I guess he hired her. And then he's like, hey, why don't you come and look at some of the, the work I have done, like, I guess it had to do with the job, right, in my trailer. Right. And she left the door open, but he went and closed it. And then he started making sexual advances on her. And he kept telling her, don't be afraid, and ended up exposing himself to her, inserting his penis up the leg of her shorts, and rubbing it against her and all kinds of stuff. And she repeated, he agreed that she repeated no. Several, like the judge found her version of events perfectly credible. No, she said no to the first time he put his hands on her. She said no to the second time he put his hands on her. She said no to the third time he put his hands on her. He continued. He would stop for a moment and then he would continue. Right. And then he let her out of the van and she kind of went home crying and then called police immediately, right? Now, perfectly understandable that this guy can't use any kind of mistaken belief that she was consenting, okay? But that's not what the wording of this amendment is going to instantiate, right? It would instantiate, okay, say you're a married couple and you make a sexual advance on your wife, and if she's not in the mood, she tells you every fucking time. Every fucking time she's ever not been in the mood, she's said, yeah, no, I got a headache, fuck off, right? Okay, and then when she does that, you have a track record of backing off, right? Okay, but then you reach for her at one point and you make an advance and she doesn't say anything. Your track record and her track record mean nothing. If you did not acquire affirmative consent before you made that advance, right, you are already in violation. You're already in violation even if she says no and you back off. You have already broken the law.
This sounds similar to what one college student is doing because, well, one woman is claiming rape against the other person because of she was unconscious. Then he said, well, no, I couldn't consent because I was drunk or something or unconscious.
Well,
and
there
I
was
couldn't
this.
agree to it.
Are you talking about the Amherst one?
I think so.
Yeah, I was going to say
really
she was.
Details.
She
She
just
was
claimed
awake.
she didn't consent. She wasn't drunk. He was blackout drunk. She was sober. She blew him. and then
Yeah.
turned around and said she didn't consent to what she did to him. And she said
While he
that
was
specifically
like-
because her roommate was upset because he was her roommate's boyfriend.
Yeah,
but I'm going to get back to this.
But the hilarious thing about that is, because there is more to add, he didn't even know that it had
No,
happened.
that's true. He didn't know
until
she filed a
until
complaint.
she accused him. She accused him, and then he was like, "Holy shit! She blew me while I was passed out. I didn't even know that happened." So then he went to file a complaint against her because he was like, "I just discovered that I was victimized," and they said, "No, you can't, because that would be retaliation."
Yeah, retaliation against the rapist that lied about you because she was afraid of the consequences of her actions. But I want to get back to the story here. We were talking about
all right.
This thing of this UN thing where they're wanting control. It's related to what we were just talking about. Is related to it in that, like I brought up, due process. This is how they eliminate. This is how oligarchs eliminate your civil rights, by blowing things up out of proportion. And yes, it was a violent act. Yes, it was a terribly violent act. And yes, there was a lot of violence that day. But this is not the degree that they're talking about it being. It is fictional. And the person that it's coming from here, right? The quote I read regarding neo-Nazis and the KKK comes from Anastasia Crickley, a native of Ireland, who chairs the UN committee. Now, I'll bet, to get to being the age where you would chair a UN committee, she's been around for a while. And she was probably around during the massive war between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland. And she probably saw violence between Catholics and Protestants. She's probably saw acts of terror by both sides, because there were terrorists. The only one I can think of is the IRA, but there were terrorist factions on both sides of the Catholic-Protestant war in Ireland. So she probably saw a lot of death and destruction, and she ought to be able to tell the difference between a peaceful protest getting attacked and fighting back, and one nut job doing something stupid, and the type of organized chaos that happened in Ireland during the conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants there, or the race riots of the 70s in the United States. But there she is, panic mongering in a press release, in which she went on to call for the U.S. government to investigate thoroughly the racial discrimination targeting, in particular, people of African descent, ethnic or ethno-religious minorities. There is no such thing as an ethno-religious minority. But this is a way of turning opposition to Muslim violence into a
Racist act.
into a racist act, and migrants. So basically, they are taking the American left's position and using accusations of racism to cover for trying to manipulate American politics. The committee also called on the U.S. to undertake concrete measures to address the root causes of proliferation of such racist manifestations, and included this last paragraph with its warning. The committee recommends that the United States of America ensure that the rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly are not exercised with the aim of destroying or denying the rights and freedoms of others, especially the right to equality and non-discrimination, and that the government of the United States of America provide the necessary guarantees so that such rights are not misused to promote racist hate speech and racist crimes. So in other words, they want...
So Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and everything they've done.
Yeah, they want the First Amendment eliminated.
Yeah.
In the name of eliminating hate speech. Yeah.
The name of my feels.
Yeah. The name of my feels. Last time the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination issued a warning to the U.S. was in 2006. Previous, of course, previous warnings have mostly been issued to far-flung places ravaged by serious ethnic strife, such as Burundi, to which 2 early warnings were issued in 2016, and the Ivory Coast. Is that right?
Cote d'Ivory, yeah.
Cote
Ivory
d'Ivory, Iraq, and Nigeria, where genocide is taking place. So we're now the one guy, one nut job driving a car into a protest, and
Puts
people
us on
hitting
fire.
back when they get the shit beat out of them. That's being
Yeah.
equated now to genocide in order
No.
to
Well, look
encourage
what how-
getting rid of the First Amendment.
Hey!
Look what CNN tried to do is like, well, this guy, that attack that happened right after Charlottesville, well, it was a copycat of Charlottesville. Like, no,
I know. Like,
Enlistment's
Wolf
been
Blitzer.
doing this for a long, long time.
Wolf Blitzer, yeah, in the wake of Charlottesville, Wolf Blitzer forgot that there had been this type of attack by Islamic terrorists for years.
I know. It's like truck of peace is not a meme, right?
No, not at all. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination was set up to enforce the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination adopted in 1965, which doesn't actually make a distinction between race and ethnicity. Although some members of the UN originally wanted to include religious discrimination, Arab states managed to block this. That's a surprise. Not.
Well, no, of
their
course they.
theocracy.
Yeah, they don't
Well,
want.
they would.
They, don't
They
want
would.
that.
They would want
They-
to ban religious discrimination against them alone.
Well, yeah, but if you ban religious discrimination, they can't crucify Christians anymore.
I know.
Or the
It's
Jews.
terrible. Yeah.
And they.
Medieval Europe.
Okay, fuck off, dog. I'm having my dinner. Go away.
From the
Eat it.
beginning, free speech has been an issue, and the United States asserted that it does not accept any obligation under this convention, in particular Articles 4 and 7, to restrict those extensive protections of individual freedom of speech, expression, and association contained in the Constitution and laws of the United States. Through the adoption of legislation or any other measures to the extent that they are protected by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Several other countries also lodged similar reservations. The committee has apparently not taken much notice, however.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. For years, the committee has been criticized for its focus on pushing a left-wing agenda. Surprise, surprise, surprise! When it comes to a focus on the United States. In 2008, the committee called on the U.S. to stop using the death penalty, restore voting rights to felons, allow terrorists held at Guantanamo Bay to legally challenge their detention, protect undocumented workers in the workplace, promote multiculturalism, and prevent U.S. companies from negatively affecting the rights of indigenous peoples living outside the United States. So that's a whole mouthful there.
Oh, the film voting thing, I think that varies by state. That's
It
not a
does.
national thing.
Well,
They don't understand our federal system much.
yeah, they don't know the
The UN
difference there.
doesn't UN.
Yeah, no. And honestly, I would call on the U.S. to stop using the death penalty. I think the government doesn't have the they're not trustworthy. I don't trust the government with the death penalty. I believe that they execute far too many innocent people.
I don't
Just think about that guy that spent. That one guy charged with rape who spent 7 years in prison.
Yeah.
And then it was a Facebook post that got him free. Her
Yeah.
admitting that she totally lied and never got charged.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I do not trust the government with the death penalty. And even if I did, there is no such thing as a humane method of killing someone. Because before they do it, the guy knows he's going to die. You cannot do that without terrorizing a person. They have to hear the death sentence. So there's no way that
But considering
anyone
there's
can
some
convince
feminist
me.
that wants to add death sentence to rapists.
Yeah, I know. And there's no way that anybody can convince me that the death penalty is a humane punishment. I personally, I'd overhaul our
Well,
whole
as far as
prison
I'm
system, but
I don't care about the humaneness of it. If you commit
I do.
If you commit first-degree murder, you have no right not to expect anything.
But
I
sometimes
don't
you run
think.
into problems with proving some
Here's-
stuff,
here's
and
my
we
thing.
have executed people wrongly before.
Yeah, here's my thing. You don't commit the level of crime that it takes to get the death penalty without having something mentally wrong with you. I don't care who you are. I don't care what There's something wrong with someone who does that. And there's two types of criminal, two really basic types of criminal in the U.S. There's criminals that can be rehabilitated, and there's criminals that can't. The criminals that can't can be contained. The criminals that can be rehabilitated. So I think you get to the point where they would apply the death penalty to the most heinous of crimes. Obviously, those are people that can't be rehabilitated. They probably need to be in a setting that is essentially a mental institution with prison bars. And that's the worst I would recommend doing. That's the worst I would think should be done to somebody. And to be honest, for me it's not about revenge. And I don't think the justice system should be about revenge. I don't think it has any place in a system that has justice as its name. Revenge is not justice. It's acting out in anger. And I don't think it makes you any better than the person that committed the crime in the first place.
Well, take it to the next level. If other people that we don't want in power get the power of death sentence, say, these extremely militant feminists, militant Antifa, guess who they're going to apply the death sentence to? Everybody that politically opposes them.
Yeah, it's okay to punch Nazis will eventually become it's okay to execute Nazis. And since everybody who disagrees with me is a Nazi has already, they've already had one guy take it to that extreme. He was nuts, but
again, like Antifa attacking each other, and one Antifa member, you can't punch someone, blah blah blah. Like, yeah, we've been saying that since you started punching Nazis. You actually this time you got it right.
Yeah, So I mean, there's gonna be a time where they're gonna try to kill people. I expect serious bloodshed from this conflict before it's over. More than we've seen so far. But,
no, especially with how the one-sided the entire media has been on this story. Like, Antifa can't do anything wrong. Well, they try to burn Milo alive.
Yeah, I was to say, is that not wrong? But yeah, when it comes to the death penalty, I am against the government using the death penalty. I'm against. It's one thing to kill in self-defense because you can't stop a person from killing you unless you defend yourself with a fatal consequence. It's another thing to do it 8 years later. 8 years later, it's not self-defense. It's just being vengeful. And like I said, I don't think vengeance is justice. But
plus, there have been way too many cases of people using the justice system as vengeance.
Yeah.
Or you're a political inconvenience. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I've had this argument over and over too. And that even if they never executed an innocent person, it would still be wrong. But and going on with this voting rights for felons, currently there are many people who are felons for doing things that are not necessarily worthy of a felony conviction. It's a felony to have a woman accuse you of rape because she decided later that her consent was invalid. And it's
10 years later.
Yep, it's a felony to have too much pot in your possession when you get pulled over by a cop. I don't think either one of those things is worthy of a felony. Shooting somebody is worthy of a felony. Breaking into somebody's house and stealing thousands of dollars worth of stuff, definitely worth a felony. Endangering...
I like that one Black Lives Matter thing where the guy that shot that black kid for breaking into his home armed, he shot him, and all the
Yeah.
community, well, how he was supposed to get his stuff for school? Like, did he drive?
Oh, that,
yeah,
that
that
pissed me off.
Oh yeah.
Tommy Sotomayor did a video about that.
Yeah, you know, there are lots of ways to get things for school without breaking into somebody's house. But yeah, so I could see the voting rights for felons thing. The terrorists at Guantanamo Bay, no, they're not citizens. They do not have citizens' legal rights. Undocumented workers in the workplace, the protection they need is to be sent home.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, right now I'm hearing about the refugees we're collecting in Quebec demanding cell phones.
Yeah, and this promote multiculturalism. The United States has been multicultural since its inception. We've never not been multicultural. I don't know what planet she grew up on, but this has been a multicultural country forever. For as long as it's existed. It was multicultural before it was a country. And the only thing that is hindering multiculturalism today in the United States, the only thing that is hindering actual multiculturalism today in the United States is idiots calling it cultural appropriation. She's not talking
feminist,
about
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
No, I think what she means is in the Carthaginian sense.
She's not talking about multiculturalism. She's talking about tokenism. That's what I think.
Because Carthage's empire was multicultural. Its provinces didn't adopt the culture of Carthage.
Ah.
Maybe that's what she's talking about.
Could be.
Everybody has a different culture entirely.
Well, it's kind of hard to do that since we're mixed in together in every state. There isn't an area that's like all. It's not like
we're a melting pot society like Rome.
There are ghetto neighborhoods, but we're not like this state is almost entirely black, and this state is almost entirely Hispanic, and this state is almost... Well, we do have some that are almost entirely white, but...
Well, just white.
But not necessarily... You know...
Excuse me.
The idea that we have to divide our cultures like that is dumb. And then prevent U.S. companies from negatively affecting the rights of indigenous people living outside the United States. Well, that's a good one, but we already do that. We already have laws that are intended to protect against United States companies going into foreign countries and engaging in human rights violations. And if the companies are caught violating those laws, they face heavy sanctions. So it'd be like saying, make sure that you, from now on, you put 50 stars on your flag. There should be 50 stars, not less than 50. And making it sound like if there's 50 stars on the flag tomorrow, it was because she said so. And it may be that they're going to look at existing laws now. Somewhere along the line, somebody's going to report existing laws as if they manifested out of this order.
You know, it's getting to the point every time I turn on the news, I expect a civil war. It may start in the United States, but it's going to start spreading across the Western world. Just with how divided everyone is becoming. Because ever since the rise of intersectionality feminism, everybody's putting borders around themselves and who they identify with.
Intersectionality is feminist for, there must be another way I can say this oppresses me. But going on with this article, the committee's recommendations stray into areas of American life that are far outside the committee's mandate and supposed competence, Steve Groves wrote in a report for the Heritage Foundation in 2008. On free speech, so this is obviously about the 2006 recommendations there. On free speech, Groves, who is now Chief of Staff to U.S. Ambassador to the United States, Nikki Haley, wrote that the committee has continually ignored the U.S. assertion that it can only enforce the Convention of the Elimination of racial discrimination so long as it does not violate the constitutional rights of Americans. While hate speech is a complex subject about which there is honest disagreement, the CERD Committee's disregard of the U.S. reservation and its repeated attempts to impose its own judgment on the U.S. as to what is and is not acceptable speech is presumptuous, he wrote. The U.S. is an independent and sovereign nation. It's bad when you have to remind the UN of that. With a long and thoroughly litigated legal tradition illuminating the First Amendment and demarcating the constitutional boundaries of free speech. The CERD Committee is not a democratically elected body and is accountable to no constituency, much less the American people. So
Yeah, they
basically,
forget
fuck
at
off.
Yorktown.
Say what?
They forget the British surrendered at Yorktown.
Yeah, they do forget that. And they forget that they are not a governing body. The United Nations is not a government. It is not the head government of the world.
I think these are mostly just its death throes.
Mostly just what?
The UN's death throes.
Yeah.
They're on the way out.
They don't understand that the 14th Constitution only applies to born in the country or properly naturalized. So illegal immigrants don't have protections.
Yeah. Groves went on to write that the committee, by continually urging the U.S. to trample the constitutional rights of Americans, demonstrates that it is acting outside of the bounds of the treaty in clear breach of its obligations to the U.S. That's a big one. Basically, yeah, he's basically saying that the this committee is violating the treaty that formed the United Nations in the first place. And honestly, if they keep doing this, I think this is a good reason for the United States to withdraw from the United Nations, which means no more U.S. dues.
They're awfully close for us to take care of them anyway. They're right in New York City.
Yeah,
we could blow them up right.
Yeah. We wouldn't have to do that. You know, as a country, all we have to do is simply say,
just send in a SWAT team or two.
We're leaving the United Nations. We're not part of the United Nations anymore, so we really don't need to house the United Nations anymore. Get out.
You owe us this many years of back rent.
Well, yeah, you know, I wouldn't even go that far. I'd just say, okay, well, you know, we're leaving, so you're gonna have to find someplace else to have your little meetings. Go to Europe.
Normies get out.
Yeah.
And you know, and if they refuse to leave, we could probably hang them as spies.
Yeah, I don't think we'd have any problem getting them to refuse to leave either. We wouldn't have to do anything violent. That's just it. All we'd have to do is say we're not part of this anymore. We're not paying our dues anymore. We're not involved in the meetings anymore, and we're not providing you a location anymore. So, you know, get out. You're done.
And they'd throw their little tantrum and then they'd leave.
Yeah, they'd throw. What else would they do? What else could they do? You know, what are they gonna? All the countries in the world attack the United States because we're not in their club anymore? That would be ridiculous.
We have enough.
Well, the problem is the United States also has the largest stockpile of weapons of mass destructions, not just like nukes, biological, cyber.
So they wouldn't.
Yeah, we could probably
clearly
win
they
a
wouldn't
war against
attack
the rest
us.
of the world.
Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody would win that war. I think it would. You ever read oh shoot, I can't think of the author's name. On the Beach was the book. The plot of the book was that there had been a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, and it had taken out the entire northern hemisphere between the actual bombs and the radiation clouds. And the radiation cloud was slowly working its way to the southern hemisphere. It was going to cover the entire world. It was that bad. And so it was a very depressing book. But I had to read it when I was in high school. And it followed the stories of several Australians whose lives intersected as they went through the last month or so before they took their cyanide pills as the radiation sickness started to kick in. And when it got to when they felt like they had the flu, they went and they didn't want it to get any worse. They went ahead and took their pills, and died. And that was the end of the novel. Was people killing themselves to avoid the worse suffering that they would experience with radiation sickness. And it was a horribly depressing novel. But I think everybody should that's going to be involved in any way in politics should have to read it. That one and All Is Quiet on the Western Front. I think it's All Is Quiet. It might be All Quiet. My senior year in high school, I had to read both of those books.
But I do agree. Like, there's some stuff that politicians and people who think internationally should read, should be aware. Like,
yeah.
I've argued people, well, if America does this, we can always do this. Like, you idiot! If anyone attacks America at this point where they don't think they have a chance, such as the world, everyone against America, it's Scorcher's policy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the thing that kept a nuclear war from happening between the United States and Russia, is that the leadership of both countries understood that any war that started would end in mutually assured destruction. And so there was no point in actually doing it. You know, all we ever had was a Cold War.
Anyway. That was all propaganda by Washington and Moscow anyway.
Well, no, there was a definite Cold War that took place, and a hot war would have ended the at least the northern hemisphere would have been screwed.
As we know it.
Yeah, that would have ended life as we know it.
Not sure we'll ever get an accurate body count for the Cold War. There was a lot of shenanigans behind the scenes.
Well, there were also a lot of non-lethal shenanigans. I mean, hell, the social justice movement is in part a product of the Cold War.
Yeah, the Frankfurt.
Oh yeah, that interview from that Russian guy explained exactly why everything's happening now.
Yep, and he predicted everything that's taking place today so well that it's like you cannot look at what's happening and look at what he said and fail to realize that, you know, this stuff was not designed to help anybody. It was designed to tear us apart. Good night, Charles. Oop. At least I thought I saw for a second that he said he had to go. Oh,
Well,
there it is. Yeah,
but
the article replaced it. Yeah, this article. I mean, like he. Boy, was his job complete. And I'm sure he wasn't the only one involved in that. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't the only one doing that. He had other people that were doing the same thing. So.
Well, he got it down exactly how they would do it. How many like 30 years from now, approximately 3 generations.
Yep.
People are going to be programmed for this, and oh look, all the millennials, all these social justice were snowflakes. Wow.
Yeah,
and talking from as a invisible minority, well, no one cares about my rights.
All right, and they're not going to. You know, their job is to care about the progressive stack, which, you know, that's they're not going to care about anybody that isn't labeled.
That is
labeled
not the right
oppressed.
color.
Yeah, labeled oppressed by their position in the progressive stack. But
like, yeah, just like all this, yeah, well, I have mental disability. That sort of like makes me a minority.
Yeah, but they don't care as much about that if you're not from some other area of the, like if you were a trans woman, they would care. If you were black, they would care. If you were Hispanic, they would care. But or if you were a Muslim, they would care. In fact, they might even say, well, you're just being wrongly treated as if you have a mental disability, when really it's just your culture.
Well,
it's just toxic masculinity.
Yes, toxic masculinity.
Well, the only toxic gender is women.
Yeah.
Well, this whole comment of toxic masculinity is turning like our entire civilization now have no male role models to look up to. A lot of people don't have fathers. A lot of people don't have male stars to look up to.
And it actually, if the UN really cared about the violence that has taken place in the United States and the racial conflict and so on, the thing that they would be admonishing us to do is to stop interfering in parent-child relationships to the degree that we're separating children from their fathers and taking so many children out of perfectly good households to put them in foster care and so on.
Well, actually, I read an article today.
Those problems are actually causing a great deal of the inability to stay within the bounds of the law when dealing with these conflicts.
But that UN wants, like the communist nation, to break up the ethical power.
Robo-Remy!
Yeah, Robo-Remy.
It's the Robo-Remy 2017 model. It's the
actually,
current year!
Well, actually,
we developed Mecha Remy to battle Mecha Hitler.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Well, actually, I read an article today. This woman who comes from a lesbian couple family, got raised by them and everything, and she said, I wish I knew my father. I didn't know I actually had a biological father till I was 11.
Jeez.
And she said, all throughout her life, I felt like I was missing something. And as soon as she met her biological father, she realized exactly what she was missing. A male role model.
Yeah, this is there's actually research showing that the importance of this, that having a male role model, actually having specifically your father as a male role model, makes a significant difference in a huge number of outcomes for kids. Like, I did a video on this and went through and described just some of the stuff that that changes when you take the father out of the home. Among other things, you lose your academic edge. You lose your ability to stay out of trouble with the law. You lose, like, you're 50% more likely to have criminal activity. You're 50% more likely to end up on welfare. You're 50% more likely to become an unwed teenage parent, regardless of your sex. That's with both sexes. Having a father in the home helps children learn how to deal with conflict better. It helps them learn how to make friends better. It helps them learn how to handle social situations better. There's a huge number of things that that fathers do for their kids without necessarily, you don't sit Junior down and, Junior, here is how you handle social situations. I'm going to give you a rundown on all social situations right now. No, they just learn it from observation and interaction with Dad.
I also heard that if you kids that have their dads, sons are more likely to stick by the mother of their children, and young women are more likely to find a guy that will stick with their child.
Well, or to stay with the father of their child. Having Dad at home, having their parents stay together, makes it more likely for young people to stay with their partners and to find partners that will stay with them. And that is true. And it's partly the example, and you learn, if you're going to learn how to have a functional relationship, you have to see one happening. You don't just automatically learn how to compromise with someone that you love. You don't just automatically, as you get older, learn how to resolve situations where you have very strong differences of opinion on how to do important things, or where somebody's doing particularly annoys you. You don't learn to tolerate minor differences. Without all this stuff, you have to have an example. You have to see somebody else deal with those things and live in a household where you're expected to deal with those things as you get older. And that's the other thing, you got moms and dads handle conflict between siblings very differently. And moms are more likely to, if one sibling tells on the other for, he's picking on me, his leg is on my side of the car seat, that kind of thing. Mom will hand out a penalty. Dad will say, deal with it. And it's because dad says deal with it, the kid learns to deal with it. The kid learns
Another
that
thing I've
some
noticed,
things are not as big of a deal as others. Another thing you've noticed?
I've noticed that tendency to get cut and punishment to cut kids down like emotionally, whereas dad straightforward.
Yeah.
Or
That is-
moms, I've seen moms with this tendency to say, "You're hurting me. This hurts me." Bring them into it instead of.
Yeah. Now I notice that more with my friends. My parents were more likely to, you do something bad and it causes a problem, part of your punishment is you have to take steps to undo the problem if you can. So for instance, let's see, there's been a couple of things when I was growing up that were particularly egregious. We tore a bunch of the pavement up off of they one time they paved the alley in between the two sides of our little city block. Another boy in the neighborhood who was kind of a bully started throwing stuff at us from the alley across the street. And so my brother and I tore a bunch of stuff up and threw it at him. Because it was still soft, but it wasn't hot enough to burn your hands. We got it all over stuff. Mom made us clean it all up. And this is something that, his mom spanked him. Our mom made us clean it all up. You made this mess, you fix it. And, like that stuck with us. Things like you break something, you get a lesson in how to fix that item. If you can't get a lesson in how to fix that item, you get a lesson in how to earn the money it costs to pay somebody to fix that item. Stuff like that. If you broke something being careless, and it was a make it right thing. And that my dad did the same thing. If you do something bad and you cause damage, you do your best to make it right. You get out in the real world, the court's going to make you make it right, so you might as well learn it now. And I'm at other kids' houses, and they do stuff like that, and mom would give them, a 20-minute lecture and ground them. And 6 weeks later, they'd still be on punishment for the thing that they did, but they wouldn't even remember, anything about it. And here they were still getting punished. Meanwhile, the thing that they broke, mom paid to replace it. Or, the mess that they made, mom had cleaned it up. And they didn't really learn anything other than this makes mom mad. So, yeah, there's definitely a difference in how parents teach kids to handle situations. And so yeah, if the United Nations was really going to give an effective, like if this was their business, and they were going to give an effective, positive, functional warning to the United States, say, you got to do something about this. The first thing they should say is stop pushing fathers out of homes, stop encouraging divorce among the families in your population, because clearly your population is becoming more violent towards each other, and obviously it's a symptom of that. But no, your freedom of speech has to go.
Well, actually, I started this thinking like if you eliminate like freedom of speech, you're not eliminating those ideas at all. You're just forcing them to go underground, and it will result it becoming more radicalized.
Yeah, and here's my experience with that. Okay, like I hate to bring this up, but it's obviously I've talked about it before. It's not a major part of my life, But, you know, my first sexual experience, I was 4 years old, and the person was much older than me. And so when it came out that I was a victim of a pedophile, all of a sudden I became on Twitter a target for pedo acceptance advocates. I didn't even know they existed until, at least not as a group. I mean, I knew there were a few nut jobs here and there that said crazy things, but I had no idea how many of them there were until that comes out.
Yeah.
And I start getting contacted by people. I learned there are actually terms, and fuck, there's abbreviations for their terms that they regularly use. Like if you start hearing them talking, it sounds like they're talking about MAP. It's something, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically the idea that sex between an adult and a child is somehow a loving act. And
yeah, that's what I've been hearing on YouTube, these pedo movements.
Yeah.
And trying to add P for pedo on the spectrum thing.
Yeah, yeah. And what has happened is, like, we do not have the conversations that we need to have about, like, what is the cause of this? How do people end up in this situation where their sexual attraction is to individuals who cannot interact with them on an equal level? Individuals who cannot make their own decisions, individuals for whom it is an authority dependent relationship rather than an adult relationship where you have two independent parties that have their own solid character built up, developed through adulthood, and they have their own solid boundaries that they can enforce, and they have their own solid sense of self and everything. That they have to have somebody with a not fully developed ego and a not fully developed sense of personal autonomy.
Oh, that's what's annoying me with all this YouTube allowing, like, oh, cheating, like 7-year-old how to masturbate videos.
Yeah, well, my thing is, I think there's a combination of factors that contribute to this, and I think if a frank and honest discussion were had about those factors and their contribution to pedophilia, and how to counteract that, it would lead to an ability to treat the causes behind pedophilia long before the person reaches an adult pedophile state. And it wouldn't be like Pray the Gay Away, where you're trying to treat a naturally occurring sexuality with religion. It would be treating the underlying causes of what is genuinely a disorder, because it's not normal for an adult to require of a partner to have a lack of personal autonomy in order for them to engage in intimacy with that partner. So, well, like I've talked about having those discussions, and I've talked about exploring the idea that perhaps in the case of, like, a lot of pedophiles have molestation in their background. Not everybody with molestation in their background becomes a pedophile. It's like, I have zero attraction to kids, period. And it never would have occurred to me. But I don't have a violent background. I don't have a background where I was raised by one parent. I don't have a background where I was denied exposure to normal, healthy relationships. And I think some of those things might contribute. We don't talk about stuff like that. Instead, when we find out somebody's a pedophile, we go into kill the beast mode. And so they've been shamed into silence and shamed into these forums where they only talk to each other. And because they're only talking to each other, they start reinforcing each other's dysfunction. And they go down this pathway where initially they're saying things that don't necessarily, they might not sound so crazy, and as they go down the pathway, every tiny little step of the way, crazier and crazier things sound sane to them because they've incrementally approached those things. And then they come out of those forums and tell normies like us that 5-year-olds who believe in the tooth fairy and can't be trusted to decide to eat supper before ice cream can consent to sex, and expect it to sound normal if they just explain it enough, because they haven't had anybody argue with them until before they got to the point of believing that. And I think that's the kind of thing that happens when even the worst bad ideas, they can actually become worse when you relegate them to safe spaces and echo chambers like that.
Well, look at the evolution of the echo chambers and safe spaces on campuses or even on YouTube itself. Just how radicalized some of the feminists and other like anti-fa people have become.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. It goes from I disagree with these people, and among them there are some people with horrible ideas, to these horrible ideas represent all of these people, and it's okay to punch anybody that has these horrible ideas. And now it's anybody I disagree with is represented by these horrible ideas, so now it's okay to punch anybody I disagree with. And at one point, you get a crazy person who comes up with the idea, well, it's okay to start shooting them. And eventually it's going to sound normal to people who are not crazy. They've just been in that echo chamber.
Well, exactly. And the problem is people that have no association with those ideologies, if you lump all of them together as one group, they're sooner or later going to adopt those ideologies and become radical because, well, I'm being called this anyway, why not?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I say it's vital, even the worst ideas that you can come up with, it's vital that we have the freedom to speak those ideas. And the people that have those ideas have the freedom to speak those ideas, if for no other reason than because if all they ever do is talk to each other, then they reinforce those ideas and they double down on those ideas and they echo back and forth and form even further down the nut job spectrum ideas in the same direction as the original bad ideas, and it gets worse. Whereas if their ideas are put out there, with the rest of the world looking at them, they're exposed to the light of day, and they're exposed to criticism by the general public, even a very frustrated general public, that allows for the possibility that people with bad ideas can figure out, this idea is bad, maybe I should abandon it. And we can it just drives me nuts that we have people suggesting that we can't express bad ideas because they're bad. That's exactly the reason why they should be expressed. They should be expressed so that other people will, that's a bad idea and here's why. But that doesn't lend itself to the type of authoritarian control that the UN is trying to get it put into place. And I really think it's time for the United States to turn around and say, you know what, we're done. Our relationship's over. Dear United Nations, sorry to inform you that we've met someone else. It's not you, it's us. Whatever we have to say, but goodbye to the United Nations. We're done.
Well, look at what they just passed in Europe, that they don't even have to come to the country to claim refugee status. They'll start the process in Africa.
Yeah. And, a large number of the so-called refugees coming in from Africa are not refugees. They're actually part of the people. They're the people the refugees are trying to escape. And this
Well, exactly.
this is the same problem I have with open immigration from Mexico. So we don't just have Juan the scared country boy who is living in an area that he needs to get out of because it's controlled by the cartels and he can't find honest work and he wants to feed his family and they're keeping that from happening, so he comes to the United States for a better situation. He's not the only guy crossing the border. The Carlos, the drug lord that wants to kill Juan, is also crossing the border. And I want Juan to come here, and I don't want Carlos to be able to follow him.
Can I just butt in for a second?
Sure.
Sure.
Can I breach the wall of this?
No, you have to apply.
Okay, I think I did because you said sure. All right.
Yes.
So that makes me officially a registered immigrant into this conversation.
Yes, but you do have to face your microphone and remain close enough to achieve consistent sound, or we won't know what you're saying.
Okay, is this good?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I just have a really quick question. I checked the. This is all business, by the way, so I apologize.
Oh, well, in that case, I should probably end the stream.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, yeah, maybe.
So,
we're
sort of in the aftermath of the discussion of the article. It's still related to the article, but it's becoming more and more loosely related to the article. So, it's about the right time for me to end the stream. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight to the listeners who are not in the Discord. And it says the stream status is bad anyway. So it was good, but now it's bad. So I'm going to stop streaming. We have a bad stream. Bad!
Because Allison showed up.
Allison showed up.
No, it's probably my internet. So, in any case, good night, y'all.